October 14, 1943. A breath of rain hung in the humid air over southern New Georgia, Solomon Islands, thick, warm and smelling of wet earth and diesel. The jungle pressed close to the makeshift road. A single track of churned coconut husk, clay and tree roots cut into the hills by men with machetes and sweat. Cicadas screamed in the canopy. Somewhere upstream, a river cussed around a fallen trunk. Lieutenant James H. Carter of the 145th Infantry sat on a crate of rations and watched men moving like slow shadows through the green. He wore his manganese steel helmet tilted back, shirt sleeves rolled, a smear of grease along his forearm where he'd been inspecting a radio set that morning. Beside him, Sergeant Henry Morales, square-jawed and sunburned, laughed in that quiet, private way soldiers laugh when exhaustion flirts with relief. "There's nothing I hate more than breaking my back, hauling a mule through this," Morales said, looking toward a narrow trail where a convoy of native carriers and a single 3-4-ton truck strained forward. If only the brass could see this. A distant clatter turned both their heads. At first it was no different from the other noises of the island, a collapse of branches, a falling fruit, but beneath it was a metallic rat-a-tat that rose in pitch and insistence. Men looked up. From the bend in the track came a small, flat-faced vehicle, its hood low and squared, the engine thrumming like an angry wasp. Canvas flaps and a folded windshield shook with each bump. It was a Willys MB. The vehicle men would soon call simply the Jeep. 4 soldiers rode in it, Corporal Samuel "Sam" Whitaker at the wheel, a lanky mechanic with grease under his nails, Private First Class Thomas Nguyen clinging to a crate of ammunition, Private Lewis Bobby Grant with a radio strapped to his chest, and a wiry signalman whose name tag read M. O'Leary. They came over the rise like a rumor. The Jeep's narrow tires bit into the slick surface, and the little machine bounced and bucked, but it kept moving, rocking, jolting, and somehow, impossibly, holding course where larger trucks would have fishtailed and become lodged. Men on the road stepped back, some with a cheer, others with a cautious, stunned silence. Lieutenant Carter's hand went to his chin as he watched the vehicle negotiate a mud-slick ford as if walking. Across the ridge, hidden beneath a fronded cover, Japanese scouts, an advance party from the 6th Combined Brigade, watched through slits in banana leaves. Their lieutenant, Hiroshi Sato, had been on the island longer than most. He had learned to read smoke patterns, to listen for the rhythmic clink of American supply trains, to triangulate camp positions from the birdsong. Today, he expected animal and human motion. He did not expect a mechanical insect. He and his men had heard Allied stories of motor trucks and bulky transports. They had not heard of this. Sato's binoculars found the little vehicle, and for a moment he stared as if the glass had betrayed him. From where Carter sat, the Jeep halted at a fallen log. Whitaker clambered out, hands already dirty with mud, and thumbed at the hand-crank starter as if acknowledging an old friend. The crew unloaded corded boxes of TNT and mortar shells, a coil of braided cable, a drum of petrol lashed under the rear seat. Whitaker spoke in clipped army shorthand to Carter, and the 2 men exchanged a practiced nod, a pact that said, "This route is now open." The little machine was no parade toy. It carried tools, bullets, men, and hope. At first they thought it was some kind of joke, Morales muttered, watching a group of native carriers reorganize themselves and stare at the vehicle like it was a ghost. "A toy for officers, but look at that. It's hauling a mortar around like it's a sack of rice." Word traveled faster than the engine. Men from a nearby artillery battery came running with a wheeled limber, because someone had heard there was a vehicle that might tow. The Jeep, with a stout winch and a pint-sized pintle hitch, toggled a length of chain, and the mortar carriage clattered free. For a brief instant, the little American machine and the heavy British-made 3-inch mortar looked like an odd couple tethered across the mud. Yet the Jeep pulled, slow, ungraceful, relentless, until the bigger equipment crested the ridge. The Japanese observers shifted. Sato's face, usually impassive, tightened. He had seen Allied Shermans and half-tracks by rumor and in distant flashes, but nothing that suggested such mobility in the guts of jungle country. He had been trained to expect supply to move on beasts or through barges hugging the shore, and when he saw that small, flat machine lurch through a stand of mangrove and a moment later rumble out on a path the size of a hallway, he felt a wheedling doubt that sat like a stone behind his ribs. Back at the American position, the Jeep became a machine of practical miracles. Whitaker and his men used it to drag a stuck truck free, to ferry a wounded man to a field surgical tent, where Dr. Eleanor Hayes, a Navy Reserve surgeon with hands steady as a compass, took one look and barked orders that saved a life. The radio that Grant lugged sputtered alive, and for the first time that morning, the forward platoon heard clear orders from command, reinforcements arriving within the hour. The little engine hummed on, a single stubborn note against the groan of the jungle. Lieutenant Carter felt something like a smile he hadn't known he'd kept. He thought of home, a garage on the outskirts of Detroit back in '39, the smell of new parts and the bright optimism of engineers who sketched things on napkins and called them practical. He had until then accepted the Jeep as a useful curiosity, but here its usefulness had teeth. It bit through obstacles. It bit through the weary superstition that heavy work required heavy machines. It brought supplies when none could get through, and in doing so, it began to redraw the map of what movement meant in this theater. Unseen, Lieutenant Sato turned toward his pocket, fingers brushing a folded map. The map trembled just slightly, not from wind, but from the tremor of a realization starting inside him, that the enemy possessed a tool that could make whole lines of defense obsolete, that the jungle's ancient tyranny over men and machines might be broken by something small and stubborn. He watched the Jeep disappear down the trail, its tail lights blinking like the eyes of a nocturnal animal, and in that darkening moment, what he had dismissed as a toy began to look dangerously like a new kind of weapon. By the time dusk spread its deep violet haze across New Georgia's canopy, the little Willys Jeep had already covered ground no other vehicle dared attempt. The sky was swollen with thunderclouds, lightning cracked behind the tree line, and the rain came in wide, merciless sheets, drumming on steel helmets and helmets alike. The jungle smelled of rot and oil, two scents that never quite left a soldier's memory. Corporal Whitaker sat behind the wheel, his eyes squinting through the downpour. "If this mud gets any thicker," he muttered, "we'll have to start swimming." Private Nguyen grinned from the back seat. "She'll make it, she always does." The Jeep roared up the incline, its 60-horsepower engine whining, the wheels spitting up gouts of brown muck. Each jolt slammed through the crew's spines like cannon fire, and yet it held. The short wheelbase, the 404 drivetrain, the high ground clearance, all features that engineers back home had argued were unnecessary extravagances when the Willys Overland Company first submitted its prototype. But here, in this drenched, God-forsaken corner of the Pacific, they were salvation. A burst of Japanese machine gun fire cracked from the far slope. The Jeep swerved instinctively, ducking behind a ridge of fallen palms. Carter's platoon hit the ground, rifles ready. The ambush was sloppy, a handful of scattered shots from desperate men. But one round sliced through the Jeep's canvas top, sending a flap flailing in the wind. "Return fire, pin 'em down," Carter barked. The men fanned out, firing bursts into the trees. The fight was short, brutal, and over in less than a minute. When silence returned, the rain had thickened into mist. Carter knelt beside the Jeep, his hand tracing the fresh bullet hole through the fabric. "Took a hit and didn't even flinch," he said softly. Whitaker smirked. "She's tougher than she looks, sir." For the Japanese on the other side, Lieutenant Sato was taking notes. Hidden in the underbrush, he crouched over a small field journal, sketching the odd square silhouette of the vehicle. "Light frame moves fast. Can climb," he wrote with quick, decisive strokes, trying to make sense of what he'd just witnessed. He'd spent months watching American supply lines, the cumbersome amphibious trucks, the tractors bogged down in knee-deep clay. But this was something new. It wasn't just mobility, it was freedom of movement. He turned to his sergeant, a grizzled man named Tanaka. "What do you think it is?" Sato asked quietly. Tanaka squinted. "It is not a tank, not a truck. Perhaps a commander's carriage. Sato shook his head. No, that machine carries ammunition, wounded equipment. It goes where even our mules cannot. The Americans have built something strange. The next morning, the Jeep's legend spread faster than any order. Soldiers spoke about it over tins of cold beans and rainwater, calling it the Iron Mule. Mechanics swore it could swim. Even the medics joined the myth. Dr. Hayes claimed it had carried 3 wounded men through a river crossing after the bridge was blown. Each story stretched the truth, but no one cared. The important part was this: the Jeep worked. It made the impossible seem routine. Carter's superiors soon took notice. Orders came from Battalion HQ. The Jeep was to be used for forward logistics runs, scouting, and emergency casualty evacuation. Whitaker's team was volunteered to test its limits, so they did. They drove through jungle so thick the headlights reflected off vines like polished glass. They crossed rivers using planks lashed to oil drums. They even towed a 37-meter anti-tank gun up a slope that had taken 30 men to clear on foot. When they emerged at the ridge above Munda, a group of Australian engineers stood staring, jaws slack. One of them muttered, "Bloody hell, they brought that thing up here?" The Jeep was becoming more than a machine. It was an emblem of American adaptability. Each clank of its suspension was the sound of doctrine changing, of warfare itself reshaping. Before, armies measured progress in miles of cleared road. Now they measured it in how far a Jeep could crawl before dawn. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Sato's report reached divisional command. His superiors in the 17th Army headquarters were skeptical. They dismissed his sketches, laughing quietly at the thought of a tiny truck being of consequence. "A novelty," one officer said. "The Americans build toys." Sato's eyes narrowed. He'd seen the future, small, agile, efficient. He knew that if these machines multiplied, the jungle would no longer protect them. Weeks later, his fears became real. A full convoy of jeeps descended upon the coast at Bairoko Harbor, hauling ammunition, stretchers, even sections of lightweight artillery. They came not in a road column, but in a dispersed swarm, each vehicle taking its own trail, climbing over logs, slipping between palm roots, appearing and vanishing like ghosts. The Japanese defenders were bewildered. They fired mortars where they thought the roads were, but there were no roads anymore. The Americans had made their own. When the battle dust cleared, Lieutenant Carter stood on the ridge, his jeep idling beside him, its tires half buried in the muck. Around him, the sound of victory wasn't the cheer of men. It was the low, constant growl of that engine, still turning, still moving forward. "This thing," he said to Morales, "might just win the war one road at a time." And somewhere deep in the jungle, Sato closed his notebook for the last time. He didn't laugh anymore. He understood now. The Americans hadn't brought a toy to war. They'd brought evolution on 4 wheels. November 2nd, 1943, dawn came sluggishly over New Georgia, bleeding pale light through a fog so thick it seemed the sun itself had been lost somewhere behind the palms. The air was heavy with the mixed scents of salt, cordite, and rain-soaked earth. In the American forward camp near Bairoko Harbor, engines coughed awake one after another, a mechanical chorus cutting through the murmur of waking soldiers. At the center of it all was Whitaker's Jeep, the same battered Willys MB that had crossed ridges and rivers and defied everything nature and enemy could throw at it. Its olive drab paint was scarred with scratches, its canvas roof half gone, its windshield still peppered with flecks of dried mud. But it ran, it always ran. Whitaker gave the choke a tug, coaxing the 4-cylinder engine to life. The sound wasn't impressive, more like a growl from a tired dog. But to the men who heard it, that sound meant connection. It meant supply, it meant survival. Lieutenant Carter approached, chewing on a half-smoked cigarette. "We're taking the east track today," he said. Recon spotted movement near the ridge. "Might be stragglers from the last engagement." Whitaker nodded, tapping the dashboard. "You think they'll hit us again?" Carter shrugged. "If they're smart, they'll stay hidden. If not, we'll find out soon enough." The Jeep rolled forward, its tires sinking deep into the jungle path. On either side, the forest loomed, wet, dark, breathing. The road twisted like a serpent, flanked by vines as thick as wrists. Every few yards, the vehicle jolted over roots or slipped sideways into the sucking clay. The men had learned not to fight it. They trusted the machine's rhythm now, letting it find its own grip, its own strange relationship with the terrain. Behind them followed two more jeeps, one carrying ammunition, the other a pair of medics with a stretcher folded in back. What had begun as an experiment was now doctrine. The Americans weren't just using the jeeps, they were building tactics around them. Fast resupply, rapid extraction, forward artillery spotting, all made possible by a 2,550-pound invention, once mocked as impractical. By mid-morning, they reached the ridge. The view stretched over the canopy, a dense ocean of green. Below, the distant shimmer of the harbor flickered between branches. Carter raised his binoculars and scanned the horizon. "See that smoke?" he said. "Japanese cook fires. Maybe 50 men, maybe more. Whitaker killed the engine." The jungle exhaled around them. The silence didn't last. A mortar round landed with a heavy, wet whoomp 50 yards away, throwing up mud and leaves. The air filled with the flat bark of machine guns. "Ambush!" someone shouted. The jeeps reversed in a frenzy of spinning tires. Whitaker slammed the gear stick down and swerved behind a tree line. One of the medics, a young corporal named Allen, was hit in the shoulder, but the jeep didn't stop. It shot downhill, tires biting, suspension screaming. Morales leaned out and fired short bursts into the trees, while Nguyen radioed for artillery. What happened next would be told around campfires for weeks. The jeeps became moving gun platforms, darting between trees, reversing, advancing, spinning, their .30 caliber mounts chattering like angry hornets. They ferried wounded men out under fire, loaded boxes of ammo back in, and returned to the fight. Every time one engine cut out, another roared to life beside it. It was chaos, but it was organized chaos, the kind that turned the tide. Up on the opposite ridge, Lieutenant Sato and his men watched in disbelief. He'd expected lumbering American trucks bogged down in mud, easy targets. Instead, he saw something that looked alive. Machines darting through trees like insects, each carrying firepower and speed. He turned to Tanaka, voice tight. This is no toy. They move like they've grown from the jungle itself." The firefight lasted less than an hour. When the smoke cleared, the Japanese forces were gone, melted back into the forest. The Americans regrouped, 23 men wounded, none dead. The medics credited the jeeps for that. Without them, half those soldiers would have bled out in the mud. That night, as the rain came again, Carter sat beside the little vehicle, its headlights dimmed under a poncho. Whitaker tinkered with the carburetor, humming some tune from Ohio. Morales poured coffee into a tin cup, handing one to the lieutenant. "You know," Carter said, staring at the jeep, "I used to think we'd win this war with tanks and planes." Morales chuckled. "Sir, I think we're winning it with 4 wheels and a heartbeat." Across the sea, reports of the jeep's performance reached high command. General MacArthur's staff ordered more. Thousands, then tens of thousands. Soon, they'd be landing on every island from Guadalcanal to Leyte, in every terrain imaginable. The Japanese, who had once mocked the toy car, were now issuing standing orders. Destroy the small trucks first. Even Sato's final field note reflected resignation. The American small car is everywhere. It is fast, light, and untiring. We cannot escape it. Even the jungle cannot stop it. In the following months, the Jeep's legend would grow beyond any soldier's imagination. It would climb mountains in Burma, ford rivers in the Philippines, and cross beaches under artillery fire. It became more than a vehicle. It was the spirit of Allied ingenuity, a symbol of adaptability that conquered not just enemies, but the land itself. Back in New Georgia, Carter's unit was reassigned. Their Jeep, scratched, dented, but still faithful, was loaded onto a landing craft for Bougainville. As it disappeared into the gray horizon, Carter found himself whispering, almost without thinking, "See you on the next road, old girl." He didn't know it yet, but the Jeep that carried him through the jungle would carry men through the rest of the war, from the sands of Normandy to the ruins of Berlin, from the jungles of Asia to the streets of Tokyo. The machine that no one believed in had become the one thing no army could fight without. The jungle never forgot the sound of it, that small, stubborn growl echoing through rain and leaves long after the soldiers had gone.